Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery for another Sutta study session. So we'll be continuing with the Dhammapada verses. So as mentioned recently, I've been going back and revising my old Dhammapada translations and selecting a few verses to speak about. So we can begin by paying homage to the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So this morning, the verses I've selected for speaking about are Dhammapada verses 47 and 48. So these are from the fourth chapter, the flower chapter, the chapter on flowers. So this one contains a number of similes related to flowers. So I'll go ahead and read through these verses, and then I'll go back and explain them in a bit more detail with reference to the Pali text. So verse 47 and 48, these are both using the same simile. So it's a similar message. So I'll read them both together and then speak in a bit more detail about it. So the first one says, as if they were collecting flowers, a person collects mental attachments. Like a sleeping village taken away by a great flood, they are taken away by death. As if they were collecting flowers, a person collects mental attachments. Never satisfied when it comes to sensuality, they are dominated by the ender. So these two short verses. And what I find particularly striking here is this image that the Buddha presents. He says, as if they were collecting flowers, a person collects mental attachments. So it calls to mind somebody who perhaps they're going through a garden or through a field, looking for beautiful flowers, things that look appealing, that look delightful, the sort of things that you want to take to ornament your home, to brighten up your surroundings, things that you think are beautiful and appealing and attractive. And collecting flowers, it has a sense of a joyful activity, a pleasant activity that brings happiness to the mind. So in the same way, a person collects mental attachments. So the Pali word here is bhyasatta manasa. And there's a few different ways that one could translate this term. So mental attachments is one way. So manasa means mind or mental. And bhyasatta literally means something you're stuck to. So it has a meaning of adhesion or stickiness, like glue. So what the mind sticks to. Again, we collect mental attachments thinking that we're gathering something beautiful or something delightful, something that will bring us happiness and joy. But actually what we're doing is we're just making the mind more and more stuck. We're making the mind more and more mired and caught in samsara. And the image the Buddha then uses is like a sleeping village taken away by a great flood. One is taken away by death. So this also is pointing to this idea that when we're gathering up mental attachments, when we're accruing more and more obsessions in the mind, then we're not paying attention to the danger that's coming. We're not recognizing the fact that death is coming and that it's going to catch us unawares. So the image of the sleeping village, the idea is that those who are asleep have no idea of the danger that's coming, and therefore they're unprepared. So again, this image of collecting flowers, so collecting mental attachments as if one was collecting flowers. So this applies especially to people who have no familiarity with Buddhist concepts. There's often this idea that the preferences and opinions and ideas that we have are valuable because they define us for who we are. They define our supposedly unique personality, our unique set of conditions. And we also tend to think of them as a source of happiness. So our obsession with our hobbies, our obsession with our preferred forms of entertainment, our obsession with our preferred kinds of food, or our preferred kinds of clothing, obsession with our preferred cosmetics or our preferred whatever it is that we prefer. So all these meaningless things in samsara, these things which are ultimately insignificant, which ultimately have no value. And also the imagery of collecting flowers. So what happens once you pick a flower? Well, actually, it starts dying immediately. It starts wilting immediately. Within a short period of time, it's extremely unappealing. It loses its appeal very quickly. This is quite apparent here at the monastery. So here at the monastery, people are always bringing flowers to put on the Buddha altars, which is wonderful. It's one of the wonderful practices that we do in Buddhism. And it's always delightful when people bring flowers to decorate the shrines, to make offerings to the Buddhas. But one of the effects of having flowers around the monastery is that they're always in some state of decay. They look great for a day or two or maybe 3, but then very quickly they decay. They start wilting and withering away, dropping their petals. The leaves start turning brown and curling up. The flower water starts to smell foul and unappealing. So then before long, you wind up throwing them out and looking for new flowers, getting new flowers. So similarly, we collect mental attachments. So we collect ideas and opinions that we hold on to. We form preferences, so tastes for particular experiences, particular entertainments or indulgences. But before long, it starts to wilt, starts to wither. So before long, it starts to lose its appeal. And when it loses its appeal, then we start looking for something else. So, and by losing its appeal, actually what's happening is that we're starting to recognize that it's ultimately unsatisfying. We're starting to recognize that the things which we thought were going to bring us happiness and joy are temporary and ultimately unsatisfying. They're not capable of bringing us the deep and genuine happiness that we thought they would. So how many times, for example, how many times have you heard about a movie that was coming out and you get really excited? You're like, oh, this is going to be so great. And then you go and you watch the movie and you're like, well, it was okay. It wasn't bad. It was moderately entertaining, but it wasn't amazing. It was okay. So it was unsatisfying. It was maybe a moderately pleasant distraction for a couple hours, but it was ultimately unsatisfying. Or even if it was a really good movie and you really enjoyed it, well, it still ends. It still comes to an end. And actually, if it didn't come to an end, then that would get tiresome after a while. The first couple hours are great, and then 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours. After 2 or 3 days sitting in the theater watching the same movie, eventually you'd start to get sick of it and want to do something else with your life. So this is the nature of the things of the world. So the things of the world they're like cut flowers. They seem beautiful at the very beginning. They seem pleasant and appealing at the very beginning, but very quickly they start to wilt. Very quickly they wither. Their appeal diminishes. And so what the ordinary worldling does is that then they just keep collecting more. The ordinary worldling just keeps seeking out new forms of entertainment and pleasure and indulgence and distraction. New ways of trying to gratify their urges. New ways of trying to distract themselves from their own dukkha. Ways of trying to distract themselves from their own deep sense of discontent. So it's this constant addictive cycle of trying to find new ways to distract ourselves from our own suffering, trying to find happiness in things which are incapable of providing happiness. So this is, again, it's the person constantly collecting flowers and always needing to collect more, because the flowers that we collect, they wilt and wither so quickly. And similarly, the second verse here, so verse 48, the Buddha actually states this quite clearly. He says, never satisfied when it comes to sensuality. So in other words, in the domain of sensuality, there's no satisfaction. You can never be satiated. So the word that's translated here is never satisfied. It's actually the same word that's used to mean like when you're done eating, when you've had enough to eat. So you know that feeling when you're completely full and you couldn't possibly eat another bite. So you're like, okay, I'm really, really done eating here. I've had everything I need. I'm totally full. Well, the Buddha's point is you never get that with sensuality. There's always something else to want, something else to crave. No matter how much you get, it's never enough. The mind always seeks more. And this last line, he says, they are dominated by the ender. So ender in Pali is Antaka. And this is one of the many names of Mara. So Mara has many names in the suttas. So Mara is the name that's most common. He's also called Papima, the evil one. He's also called Nemochi, which means the enemy, the nemesis. And in a number of places, he's called Antaka. So Antaka means the ender. So this is connected to the idea of death, that everything eventually ends. And that's only a problem if you're attached to things. If you're not attached to things, then things arise and cease and arise and cease. They come and go all the time, and there's no problem. That's just the nature of reality, is that things are constantly coming and going. There's only a problem if we want things to come and not go. There's only a problem if we want things to stay. Then we suffer. But if we recognize the nature of all things is to come and go, then there's no problem. The mind is never disturbed. So I don't really have too much else to say about these verses. Again, emphasizing this habit we have of collecting attachments, of constantly trying to seek out new indulgences, new things to latch onto, new ways to identify ourselves through preferences, and acknowledging that there's no end to this. No matter how much we accumulate, no matter how many experiences we have, it's never enough. So the Buddhist path then is to take a different approach, which is to reevaluate our strategies, reevaluate what we're doing with our mind. So maybe the solution is not to collect more attachments, but rather maybe the solution is to stop seeking things to be attached to. Maybe the solution is to let go of our constant seeking, and to cultivate contentment. Contentment with knowing the impermanence of all things. Contentment with watching things come and go, but not trying to hold on to anything and not trying to obstruct anything. But just letting phenomena flow through the mind without making an issue of it one way or the other. So I think that's all I have to say on these verses. Again, just a couple short, lovely words from the Buddha. So at this time, I'll take any questions that you might have. So I see a few people joining in online. So hello to Kumu, Jayanta, Patricia, Jen, Sud, Amaranta, Gita, Sarah, and Michael. Welcome. And I see one question from online. So Michael asks, either new flowers or just leave them to appreciate their decay, which is no less lovely than the full bloom. Yet is this antithetical to the spirit of the verse? Well, and if you're talking literally about flowers, then yeah, appreciating the decay of flowers. This is another beautiful thing about having flowers on the Buddha altars, by the way, is the fact that they do decay, because that's a reminder of impermanence. It's a reminder that this is the nature of all things. No matter how beautiful or appealing something is, its nature is to wither and decay. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way things are. So it's only a problem if we want things to stay the same. If we don't make a problem out of it, then there isn't a problem. So the wilting of flowers is perfectly natural. It's perfectly normal. In fact, it would be a problem if flowers never wilted. That would be disastrous, in fact. So acknowledging that wilting and withering is just part of the cycle of natural life. There's nothing wrong there. Is it antithetical to the spirit of the verse? It is, actually, because it's overextending the metaphor. So the point of the metaphor here is that when we collect attachments, so we're constantly seeking new forms of indulgence, or we're constantly seeking new elements of personality. So actually, when I see the line collecting mental attachments, the main thing that comes to mind for me is thinking about how we construct a self-identity out of our preferences. So it's collecting not necessarily the experiences themselves, but rather the construct of I am the person who likes this and this and this and this. This is what defines me. I like this kind of music and this kind of food and these kinds of movies. Like, we define ourselves through our attachments. But in so doing, we make ourselves vulnerable. We make ourselves subject to suffering. So whatever we're attached to is a source of pain, because it's subject to change, subject to loss. And self-identity is itself the root of all suffering. This is the primary teaching of the Buddha. Any kind of self-identity is itself dukkha, causes us pain and misery. And then Rahim asks, how can we begin to stop seeking attachments instead of gathering? Well, the first thing actually is recognizing the painfulness of attachment. So paying attention to the discomfort that's caused through trying to hold on to things which are changing. So you can remember all the times that you've experienced depression or misery or confusion because you were trying to hold on to something that was subject to change. So reflecting on the drawbacks of grasping, then we're less likely to do so in the future. And the other thing is cultivating a happiness which is not connected with attachment, which is not related to grasping or clinging of any sort. So cultivating the happiness of contentment, the happiness of renunciation, the happiness of non-attachment, the happiness of non-identity, of not being anyone, of not needing to have any clear identity, of not needing to have any list of preferences. And you'll start to realize that there's a sublime joy that comes from not seeking. There's a sublime joy that comes from not having an identity. It comes from not having preferences or opinions. Then Sud asks, sensual desire becomes a habit, especially in lay life. If we want to let go, then they say seek out higher happiness. But this would require letting go of sensual desire. Is it a catch-22? No, it's not. Yeah, there's no problem. You really can't go wrong with letting go of sensual desire. It doesn't bring happiness. It just brings distraction. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if one wants to practice Buddhism, then normally you do it step by step, piece by piece. So you don't necessarily need to take on everything all at once, but rather what you do is you integrate pieces of the Buddha's teachings. So one piece at a time. And actually, a lot of people, they're practicing Buddhism with the thought of like, well, these certain things I'm not going to let go of anytime soon. So that's fine. Put that on the side. That one's not going away. But I'll work on these parts of the practice. So making this distinction, so compartmentalizing one's life. And this is especially the case with lay practitioners, especially if you're in a relationship or married, or if you have financial obligations or things of that sort, then yeah, there are certain elements of advanced Buddhist practice which aren't really an option yet. Maybe later in this life, they might be an option, maybe not until a future life. And that's okay. So you can say like, okay, so these elements of Buddhism, I'm not quite going to be able to do just yet. But these other things I can do right away. I can start working on integrating these other elements of the practice. So as long as you have some kind of growing, some growth, some element of Buddhist practice that you're working on growing and developing, then it's okay if there's still some areas that you're not working on. As long as you're willing to admit that at some point, you're going to need to work on those things. At some point, you're going to need to let go of those forms of desire and attachment. Maybe not anytime soon, but eventually. Then there's no problem. So as long as you have the right view that eventually you'll need to let go of those attachments, then as long as you're working on something, then it's okay to save some things for later. You don't need to do everything all at once. So not even monks are doing everything all at once. Even we are practicing piece by piece, step by step. And Gita asks, would it make sense to see with noble wisdom our habit energies and let go of them by training our mind with these arising thoughts, basically use mindfulness and awareness to let go of all conditioned things. Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah. And Sud asks, is it so that at least part of the time we listen to the Dhamma, we are free of the 5 hindrances, and hence this is why we feel calm and free when we listen to Dhamma? Actually, yeah, that's one reason. So when listening to the Dhamma, we're hearing the words of truth, the words of genuine happiness. And if one listens to the Dhamma with complete attentiveness, then yeah, that does naturally help one to let go of the 5 hindrances. Yeah. And that's the last of the questions from online. Any questions from the residents? No? Okay. So we'll go ahead and end the session here. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.